talking about things, and please raise your hand if you don't understand that, and then we'll get some interpretation. Let me tell you a little bit about the legacy of my uncle since really 2008. So how many people have seen the Sean Penn movie Milk? Oh, quite a few, okay.
Quanti hanno visto il film? Ragazzi, ma sì,
ok. Aiuterò Stuart nella traduzione, farò darò del mio meglio in questo, quindi ogni volta che qualcuno di voi non comprende quello che Stuart sta affermando, vi chiedo per cortesia di alzare la mano. La sua prima domanda è stata molto semplice, era quanti di noi hanno visto il bellissimo film Milk del 2008?
Allora non era un problema di inglese, non l'hanno proprio.
So, I don't have a translator.
Quindi se avete problemi, ci sono dei passaggi che meritano una traduzione, vi preghiamo di dare un segno in modo tale che ci fermiamo e facciamo subito una traduzione.
Well, let me make it a little bit personal for you. So when my uncle was killed, I was 17 years old, and I was gay myself. I knew that I was gay when I was about 12. And again, my uncle was running for public office, and the way the press and the media would report that was an avowed homosexual. So the New York Times, I lived in New York. Harvey lived in New York until 1972 when I was 12, and then he moved to San Francisco. When he ran for public office, the headlines, or whenever he made a speech or something, of the New York Times would be avowed homosexual. That might translate just that, avowed homosexual.
Sinceramente non saprei tradurre.
Sostanzialmente, scusate, diceva Stuart, insomma,
quando nel 72.
Mi sentite? Ok, benissimo. Stuart aveva 12 anni quando ha fatto il suo coming out, all'età di 17 anni, aveva 17 anni, scusate, quando lo zio Harvey è morto.
E raccontava questa esperienza di come,
di come ogni volta che lo zio Harvey prendeva posizione e quindi veniva riportato sui giornali quello che lui faceva, le sue azioni eccetera, e in particolar modo il New York Times, che oggi insomma è un giornale molto liberale per come lo conosciamo noi, si esprimeva sempre come il gay dichiarato, come il gay temerario, senza paura, scusate.
L'espressione del titolo dei giornali era un mix tra una cosa che dovrebbe suonare tipo evidentemente schifoso, ecco, una cosa del genere, ecco. Ok, thanks.
So when I was, by the way, my uncle knew that I was gay, but we never talked about it, believe it or not. So here's this avowed, maybe it's a better transition, open homosexual who was so famous. And by the way, Milk is not a common last name. There's probably 5 people back then, all my family with the name Milk. So just think about being in school and your last name is Milk and you already feel different and people see you, and they're like, are you like your uncle? So, and then of course I'm like, no, I'm not. And so my uncle, I told him that I felt different, and he gave me a book called 7 Arrows. It's a great book if you ever want to learn about Native American tradition. It goes back, so to put into perspective religion, the book talks about Native American traditions that date back 20,000 years. So these are very old stories. And the book called 7 Arrows has a story about jumping mouse, a mouse that felt different from all other mouses. Anyway, he wrote in that, and this is the one part that I would interpret. help interpret. But anyway, he wrote, "You and all your differences is the medicine that will heal the world, even when the world doesn't recognize that." It was very deep, but it was important for me at 12 to get that. So you and all your differences is the medicine that will heal the world, even when the world doesn't recognize that.
Diceva che un giorno
ha ricevuto in omaggio dallo zio un bellissimo libro chiamato Seven Arrows, quindi le 7 frecce, di storie di nativi americani, e nella dedica che lo zio ha scritto a Stuart appunto si diceva sei tu con le tue differenze ad essere, diciamo, to heal the world, cioè a guarire la società, a guarire il mondo, a renderlo diverso.
So for me, that set a path and a compass for me to embrace my differences, even when most of the kids in school thought differences was bad. It was, you know, the peer pressure in schools was to be the same and to not be different, and certainly not live your life that's considered illegal and a mental illness. And so, so my uncle went back to San Francisco and said, "Oh, I have a gay nephew," but to me, he never said that. He would call me on the phone, or when I would see him, he would say, so really excited in his voice, "So how did you feel different today in school?" Which is like the thing that you don't want to, you know, he was like, "Did you feel different today?" Like it was a great thing, and I'm like, "Yeah, I did," you know. So he was a loving uncle first, and that he saw as his major goal. It was not a Hollywood story, that for those of you who did see the Sean Penn movie, my uncle predicted his death. And the reason that he did is that he got hate mail and death threats every day. Now, in the US at the time, I know just one thing about the United States, hate is different. Our Constitution protects freedom of speech, including hate mail, including death threats, as long as the death threat is not going to be consummated. So someone saying, "I think you should be killed," or that someone will kill you, is not illegal in the United States. Our Constitution is very strong in freedom of expression. I know it's different in Europe. So the fact that he got death threats was not illegal, but we keep these death threats, and some of the death threats came from police chiefs. We call them sheriffs, but there was one in Orange County, California that said, "Harvey, if you come into my county, my police will shoot you." So he knew that he was going to be killed. He didn't know who and he didn't know when, but he knew it was going to happen, which is why he made a recording that said, "Let the bullets that smash through my brain smash through every closet door." It was very much Martin Luther King-like, where Martin Luther King said, you know, "One day we're all going to live together in peace. I will never get to see that day." My uncle said, "Let me be the last person to take bullets. Let me be the last person to take the hatred because I'm different." And he didn't, by the way, do that just for LGBT people. He included every other minority group. He said, no one should have to hide who they are, who they authentically are. No one should have to put on a mask. And he believed that it was a tremendous burden on not only that person to have to hide who they truly are, but it's a burden on our society, our community, our school. It's even a burden on your family. Think about all the energy and time it would take if you had to hide who you were. Would you be able to fulfill your passion and purpose in life if you were, if you were spending so much time hiding who you are? Would you be able to support your family and nurture and grow your family as you should if you were spending most of your energy hiding from your family who you were? So he didn't see that as a positive in any way. Now, what's changed today in the United States and in many places around the world is because people have basically, 35 years later, followed his message. They are visible. We see celebrities and sports figures and young people just being visible. Young people at least standing up for other young people. So the real heroes, there's a big debate in the United States about who is the hero today of the LGBT rights movement. And I always say that the heroes are every average, everyday person who lives their life authentically. whether they're Roma and they say they're Roma, whether they have a disability and admit to their disability and talk about it and share that, whether it's a religious minority or an immigrant who talks about where they're from, or a gay and lesbian person who becomes visible, or someone who stands up for them. So every one of you who stands up for someone who's different, whether it's in the lunchroom or on the playground or in your neighborhood, or making videos, or even having the dialogue, you are really the heroes today of not just the LGBT rights movement, but of the civil society movement. And Italy as a country, just as the US as a country, just as every other nation, we can't, as nations, fulfill our full purpose and passion unless we have people being authentic, people being who they are. And let me tell you, it's never an easy process. Natia and I were talking earlier about, even companies that are supportive of LGBT people, it's still a struggle for someone to come out sometimes. Anyone ever heard of Apple Computer? Yes, okay. So Apple Computer is actually the chief executive officer, the head of Apple is a gay man, who, by the way, just did a wonderful public statement on being gay and hoping that he inspires other people being openly gay. But it's still, we meet people in Apple in the US and around the world who are gay, who come up and tell me it's still a struggle. When you're only 3 or 4% of the population, it will always be a difficult process of coming out. There will always be a kitchen table conversation with parents that will be difficult. Even parents, my parents were completely open and receptive to my being gay, but my mother still cried. And I think they're okay. You're okay? Yes? Okay. And let me tell you about the issue that's changed for moms crying. And I think this is particular, I think Italians would understand this. So my mother cried not because I was gay, but because she thought my life would be harder. I mean, her brother-in-law was killed. And she worried about children, grandchildren. Where are the grandchildren? So I'll tell you that in the US and in Western Europe and even in places in South America, there's a gayby boom. It's called a gayby boom, but we have gay couples having children all over the place. So it's no longer an issue. So if you do know of anyone who's LGBT and you understand from them that they're worried about, people worried that they're not going to have children or they're not going to give their parents grandchildren, let them know, whether it's the celebrities in California, the gay celebrities that are having children. There's plenty of references of gay couples that can now have children. And by the way, that takes on the very fundamental attack that LGBT people have always had, which is that they can't have children and they can't procreate. Well, guess what? We can. The other important piece on the marriage kind that I think has relevance for Italy, and me being a guest here, I'm going to feel comfortable just kind of closing and talking about this, is that there's a country in the middle of Italy. I think most people know that there's a country in Rome. And the leader of that country actually had a huge battle with a friend of mine who's the president of Argentina. And President Cristina took on then Cardinal, who's now Pope Francis, but then the Cardinal, took on him directly on marriage equality. And she did it in reference to historical issues with the Catholic Church and their belief in what's right and wrong. So she basically talked about the 20 years in Argentina where the only way you could get married was under canon law, and therefore you had to be Catholic. So Jews who lived there and Protestants who lived, they couldn't get married. And the Catholic Church said, but that's God's law. And now that changed. So she basically took him on the historical issue of Catholicism and religion in general. And let me also say that I love the fact that you guys in the video talked about that, because if you get someone who says, well, the Old Testament says, it's an abomination or it's wrong, You know, we're looking for someone who's wearing cotton and polyester, because the Old Testament says that that's an abomination. Or look at a woman who looks at a man where the Bible says that they could be stoned to death. So, I mean, or that slavery, that how you treat your slaves. We don't, there's many, many parts that we have moved past that was Old Testament. A friend of mine always says, you know, Old Testament is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We'd all be blind and toothless if we lived that way. So, and I think it's I know it's certainly not far enough, but I think it's important that we do have a leader of a major religion that has been against inclusion, that is saying things like, who am I to judge? These are positive movements forward. Church is very old. It's not going to change overnight, but I do think we see change. And again, the change is because of all of you. You are absolutely, when I say you, young people are in many ways driving this. Now, we have struggles in the world that young people are being co-opted into negative movements. So the people who will move us into division and separation are the people who, what we call cheap politicians. And why I say they're cheap, I'll give you an example in Hungary, and I think you guys should know what's going on in some places of the world. So we've got a party in Hungary, or in your neighbor Greece, called Golden Dawn, but in Hungary it's the Jobbik Party. They'll stand on the shores of the Danube, and they'll say, who is stealing from you? The Roma are stealing from you. Who's taking your jobs? The immigrants are taking your jobs. Who wants your children? The gay people want your children. Who has all of your money? The Jews have all your money. They have a shopping list. And that's pretty much what my uncle dealt with. There was an evangelical Christian campaigner. Her name was Anita Bryant. And she was a former Miss America, and what we call, she was an orange juice spokesperson. And she said that the gays are here to recruit your children. And my uncle took that phrase away from her. So if you see the movie by Sean Penn, you'll see that my uncle began his speech wherever he went, said, I'm here to recruit you. And then he would go on and talk about civil rights and justice. So we are going to have a very big decision in the United States in June. 70% of Americans can get married to their same-sex partner today. 30% can't. So we have some conservative states. And all of those, the major progress has happened by our Supreme Court. You know, when 5 years ago, the first time I did a 7-city tour in Italy, the mayor of Albano, is that correct? Mayor of Albano said, you know, I'm welcoming Stuart Milk, and he picked up a US Constitution. And it's interesting because, you know, I'm coming from a country that's 200 years old to a country and to a civilization that, you know, is 10 times that. And he said they have this oldest document that is like the oldest living document like this, which we do have, which is our US Constitution. Our people's Constitution is the oldest continuous constitution in the world. And that Constitution, as my uncle said, is that everyone has inalienable rights, including the right to be free and the right to pursue happiness. Period. There's no qualification that says if you're not gay, if you're not an immigrant, if you're native, if you're a man. So that constitutional right will be protected by our Supreme Court. We have now literally 100 court decisions that, again, the only role of the courts in the US is to protect that Constitution. That's their role. And the president can't make gay marriage happen across the country by our laws. It has to be done either by the legislature or by the courts. And it will be done by the courts because you can't qualify the right that everyone is entitled to, which is the right to be a full, complete human being, unmasked, not having to hide, and as the President Obama said, to provide hope to yourself, to your community, to your family, hope that's not afraid, and hope that's not ashamed. So it's been a great honor for me to be here with all of you. You guys are amazing. I guarantee you that we've got some future leaders of Italy and world leaders here, just from your enlightened questions. Let me close with a quote from Steve Jobs, because we lost him a couple years ago, and so the guy who invented Apple and the iPhone and the iPad, he had a very famous quote that my uncle would have loved, which is, only the people who are crazy enough to believe that they can change the world are the only ones that ever do. So let me repeat that and get an interpretation. So the people who are crazy enough to believe they can change the world are the only ones that ever do. And I believe that we've got some crazy ones here who are going to change the world.
Stuart chiede qualora ce ne fosse bisogno di tradurre almeno l'ultima citazione che ha fatto, che è quella di Steve Jobs, il quale ha dichiarato che solamente le persone così pazze da credere a poter cambiare il mondo ci riusciranno, e quindi vorrebbe che questo messaggio portassimo con noi, insomma, come dono di questo bellissimo evento. Quindi io ringrazio nuovamente Stuart e prima di ringraziare nuovamente la vostra scuola ci terrei quindi a proseguire e a introdurre un altro